So that's what we're talking about here with the influence of Hegel. So Hegel has a profound influence on everything past Hegel. Just like I said with Kant, where Kant has this massive influence beyond his lifetime. Everybody's still reckoning with the ideas of Kant. We could say the same exact thing about Hegel. So we have the development of these two very different schools of thought that arise from Hegel. One is a group known as the Young Hegelians, which then includes Karl Marx. The Young Hegelians are left-leaning Hegelians who believe that, they take the idealist ideas and put them in a materialist framework. So they would say that this growth is not really any underlying non-material thing. And there's a lot of debate about exactly what he means by spirit, but they would say that it's really just the growth of the progress of material reality. So all that exists is material. And we can understand through historical materialism in Marx, he would say that we understand this growth of the world just by means of physical interactions, physical things bumping against physical things and doing physical things. But that is going to bring about revolution, because part of this progress of the physical world growing is a growth toward a kind of utopia. And that's going to happen through the communist revolution. So capitalism, he's going to say, is part of that. We're growing out of that, right? That's one phase of, say, the Geist that we're moving out of into an era of socialism, in Marx's view. So you have the young Hegelians who are using Hegel's philosophy to say we need a radical break from the past and radical revolution. On the other hand, we have nationalism and authoritarianism, fascism, that is often called Hegelian as well. And the reason for that is, well, if you say, first of all, a couple things lead to nationalism. One is Hegel speaking, like Kant does, about nations as subjects rather than just people. Another is that as he talks about the development of the Geist, he tends to focus on the state. And this also leads to, at least in the minds of some, a lack of any ability to really criticize what the state does, because there aren't these universal timeless truths that you can use to judge the state. That's just where the Geist is now. You defend the state, no matter what. And that leads to authoritarianism. So there are you've got problems on both the kind of the far right and the far left grab onto Hegel in different ways. Not those who are coming from a Christian perspective, but these are those who are, on the far right fascist side of things and then on the Marxist side of things. But Hegel also has an influence on more orthodox theology. So Erlangen, which is a school of theological thought in the 19th century in Germany, a lot of those thinkers are impacted by some of Hegel's ideas. So the point is all over the map, from, the far left to the far right to people who are relatively in the middle, are influenced by Hegel in some way in various fields. He has a really huge impact on theology. You have, first of all, and there are many ways that he has an impact on theology, but here's just a brief summary of some of these. F.C. Bauer comes up with this hypothesis that ends up being quite popular, which is this idea that Christianity formed out of these two opposed schools of thought. So that there was a Jewish school of thought that he identifies as Petrine Christianity. So he says this is kind of Peter's school, which is more Jewish. And then there's the more Hellenized or the more Greek school of thought that he would say comes from Paul. And Christianity becomes the religion it does because of the two, say the thesis and the antithesis kind of coming together to form this synthesis. So the way people talk about development of religion, and this is just one example of that, becomes very influenced by Hegel's system. So they start applying what he's doing with history to the growth of the history of Christianity. And you see this especially in the Religionsgeschichtlich school, which is the history of religion school of thought that develops out of Hegel's writing, where Hegel starts to see this growth of historical process in terms of religion. So now you have, after Hegel, the development of a school of thought which is going to study religions as natural historical development. So they're not going to see religion as anything supernatural. They're not going to say it's supernatural revelation. They're going to say instead it's just natural product of what happens in human history. And so they come up with this whole idea of, starts with animism and then polytheism and then ethical monotheism. And then that leads to this is something that still exists, but oftentimes the earlier schools thought that where they were at was kind of the height of religious development. Okay. Then we have the development of process theism. Alfred North Whitehead is a major figure here, though he's not the only one. So we have process theology that, as we understand in Hegel, the world spirit growing, people start to speak of God in that way, that God is in this historical process himself, that he is constantly changing. So in a lot of liberal churches, you see this kind of process theology show up in different ways. You know, you go to your local UCC church, it's probably Hegelian in some sense because it's probably influenced by process theism, because it is very likely that there is an idea that God is constantly changing and the world is changing and he's just kind of changing with it and improving and growing himself. Which means that you really have no, religious authority other than what you decide God is doing, because there's no like objective universal truth that's in Scripture or anywhere else that you use to guide your system of thought. It's just what the world spirit is today, I guess. Okay, then you have the Theology of Hope. The Theology of Hope, to be clear, these figures are going to say they're not Hegelian. Jensen argues very adamantly against that when Thomas Weinandy accused him of being Hegelian, but I think he is. And that doesn't mean self-consciously so, but the Theology of Hope is a perspective of theism which puts the future, eschatology, last things, as kind of the root of all things. So every theological conclusion kind of drawn from eschatology or last things, and that includes God's own being. So there's this notion that God ends up being future to himself. The Spirit is the future of God. I don't have the time to get into all of the complexities, and these three figures all believe different things, by the way, but they're all generally Theology of Hope figures. But the point is, this has an impact on Christian theologians, I think, in other ways, that people start to challenge questions of things like God's timelessness, the notion that God exists outside of time. God is part of historical process or within historical process for some of these thinkers. Now, they're not going to go as far as the process theologians are, but they're challenging the convictions that there are these universal, objective, what they would call static realities that Christianity grows out of. And they are, in one sense, they're right. So I would say in one sense, they're saying that in Christianity, we do have the historical realities of the death and resurrection of Christ as central to our faith. I mean, right, the Christian faith is dependent upon historical reality. It's not just dependent on timeless abstract truths. So they see, I think, a kind of kindred thinker in Hegel in some ways on some of these points. Karl Barth said that he was fond of a little Hegeling sometimes. So Barth's influenced by Hegel as well. So a lot of modern thinkers are. Other philosophies grow out of Hegel in some ways, or at least respond to him. Existentialism grows in some ways out of what Hegel does. Kierkegaard is going to challenge Hegel, but so Hegel in that way helps form some of Kierkegaard's philosophy. Pragmatism, the philosophy known as pragmatism, which gets popular especially in the United States, is based upon these non-metaphysical readings of Hegel, that he's not really talking about reality at all, which generally is rejected today. There aren't a lot of non-metaphysical arguments for understanding Hegel anymore. Nonetheless, that is what forms a lot of what we see with pragmatism, especially in America.